of 2 or 3 bananas. You cannot sell bananas with abnormal curvature of the fingers. Why should they tell us? Why should they tell us how powerful our vacuum cleaners should be? Why should they tell us how powerful our hairdryers should be?
I'm going to pose a question to you guys. How do we define a dangerous politician? Is it the individual who's willing to make risky decisions in uncertain scenarios with subjective moral convictions? Or is it the individual who makes decisions to pander to his audience in order not to be liked, but to be loved? These two descriptions can easily be associated with the likes of Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, Bolsonaro, and all the populist leaders who have fast-tracked to the top of the political food chain in the recent years. But why? In short, big short, the 2008 financial crisis depleted any trust left between the government and the populace, which eventually resulted in demagogues such as Donald Trump to take advantage of this fear by promising the nation to get rid of the swamp in DC and target vulnerable groups with unrelentless attacks towards racial and religious people in America. This political virus, as I would like to call it, mutated into dangerous variants, pressurizing democracies into the ground and further pushing for neoliberal agendas that has already assaulted any means of economic progression in Western societies. This regression is nothing compared to the ecological disaster Trump and his gang of dimwits has imposed on the future of organized human societies. Arguably the greatest crime in all of history that is not punishable by the law. In this video, I am going to go deeper into this issue of erratic populism, as I would like to call it, and take the isolated case study of Boris Johnson, a man who seems to have a dual personality where in his public life he seems to be magnetically attracted towards the forces of controversy whenever cameras are flashing. Presenting himself as a clown, a caricature version of himself, he intentionally draws you in with these well thought out traps which induces you to lower your expectations of him so that he can get away with things such as lying to the Queen, lying to the public, lying to the Parliament, inciting hate speech, targeting minority groups and breaking every single parliamentary code there is, because one rule for the majority and another one for the elites. Look, in his private life it takes some level of planning and having intellectual capacity to create this kind of character which goes against the norm of what we expect from a hard-headed Tory, apart from the lying and the corruption which apparently runs in the blood. Look, I find Boris Johnson to be more callous but thoughtful on topics he's passionate about. A man so capable of rational thinking at times, yet a man so intent in furthering his ambitions of becoming world king, a goal he set himself at the age of 9. And look, in Boris Johnson's mind, he thinks he's matching the heroics of his role model, the first emperor, William Churchill. I think a quote that really applies to Boris Johnson's life came from William Churchill, who once said, "Success consists of going from failure to failure without the loss of enthusiasm." A quote that sadly for the rest of us applies to Johnson's life in a very ironic way. In a series of interviews and sit-downs with Tom McTake and Boris Johnson from The Atlantic, an article you should definitely check out, Boris Johnson is quoted saying, "Nothing can go wrong," as he started jumping into the driver's seat of a tram he was about to take for a test ride. Nothing can go wrong. Indeed, nothing went wrong for Boris Johnson in his mind. A mind so shielded by humour to cover for his failings and insecurities as a result of being born into an elitist culture. A mind so intent on being world king, a goal he'd set himself at the age of 9, because even at a young age, Boris might have realised that the only way to stand out from his peers, who all had access to the best private education, wealth and connections, was to eventually exercise power over them. So why was Boris Johnson attracted to the position of being a king? Well, in simple terms, kings can get away with anything, a doctrine that Boris Johnson had firmly established in his private and public life. A mind so warped around the ideology of me first that he had to compulsively lie his way into the Prime Minister position with his sensationalist Leave campaign in 2016. A campaign based on everything he opposed. As a liberal, Boris was once in his life a man that supported immigration and the idea of Britain staying in the EU. But these viewpoints wouldn't make him stand out in the Tory party. Rachel Johnson, the unfortunate sister of Boris Johnson, as I would like to call it, suggested that from an early age on, Boris had realised that he would likely go further in politics if he went against the ideals of a traditional Tory politician. And if you think about this, it kind of makes sense, because how else would he stand out in a very homogenised elite circle consistent with the likes of David Cameron and George Osborne and even Michael Gove, the dealer off and on the parliament. So in the 2016 campaign, Boris Johnson had used his magical powers to sabotage the whole of Britain for the next 10 years. As a tactic, he posed himself as the hero of the working class whilst having no clue over what the price of a pint of milk is. Boris, with the help of Brutus, Dominic Cummings, lied to the nation over and over and over again, cosplaying as William Churchill whilst posing with the same aura of Jennifer R. Curie in front of a red bus, a form of public transport he has probably never utilised in his life, in exception for public relation purposes. He promised to the naive crowd of hardcore nationalists that Brexit would save the UK 350 million a year and thus could save the NHS by himself. The public, having been maligned by the onslaught of austerity policies, decided to hatch onto this lie and eventually vote Britain out of Europe and build the pathway for Boris to finally achieve his long-lasting dream. With this opportunity in sight, leveraging the country's economic future for an opportunity at the most important position in the United Kingdom was not something Boris would idly accept, but an offer he would stab you in the back for, something Cameron realised after his long-time rivalry with Johnson has ended. And spoiler, he lost. In hindsight, at least Cameron won't go down as the worst Prime Minister in history, maybe the second worst. How did a man like Boris Johnson get in the most powerful position in the UK? Well, 2 words: performative incompetence. We have all seen the viral clips, the jokes and the shenanigans he finds himself when the cameras are on, like this. Like this.
If I have a cup of tea, will you answer my question?
No, I'm here solely on a humanitarian mission, because you've been here all day and you've been incredibly patient and I feel very sorry for you, because I have nothing to say about this matter except to offer you some tea.
Okay.
You see, don't mistake his light-hearted comedy sketches. This is essentially a cunning device, as Johnson puts it. In an interview, he openly suggests that self-deprecation is all about understanding that basically people regard politicians as a bunch of shysters. Being a shyster equates to controversy. Controversy is a currency used by demagogues like Johnson to tap into the fears of the general public and amplify them tenfold to create chaos. Examples are very plentiful. A campaign named around Build the Wall by Donald Trump. Boris's Let's Take Back Control and Get Brexit Done. And Reagan's Let's Make America Great Again. In essence, Boris directly admits to these tactics in his belief that people live by the narrative. Human beings are creatures of the imagination. The same imagination Boris used to compare himself to this ideal, the real British Imperator William Churchill, in which he, funnily enough, likened himself as a wartime leader during the pandemic. And we all know how that story went. The highest deaths in Europe as a result of COVID, breaking his own laws and partying during the lockdown with wine and cheese, spending billions on a test and trace system that didn't work out, lying to the public time and again, and plenty more that I'm forgetting. Now I want to briefly touch on another aspect of Boris's story, and his name is Dominic Cummings, the real mastermind behind the Brexit campaign, who happened to kind of grow a conscience during the pandemic and eventually call out Johnson for his despicable handling of COVID and other important matters in Boris's agenda, such as fixing tax issues for James Dyson, he's his close friend, illegally allowing Tory donors to pay for his flat refurbishments in exchange for a House of Lords position. The worst in all this was when Cummings allegedly heard this absurd comment from the Prime Minister, who was stated to prefer to let their bodies pile high instead of imposing another lockdown. Look, this was bad comedy, and Boris Johnson was at the time probably looking for a reaction in his cabinet, but I believe This is another crack in his persona he embodies, the persona of being anti-prime minister. He has no conscience, no principles, no rationality, no integrity, no skills besides the art of deception, no commitment to public service, no compassion or empathy, no regards towards the welfare of the public. But he does have this one quality which I believe makes Boris's rise to fame a Shakespearean tragedy. Something Boris is very aware of, as Cummings once again claimed that he was apparently more focused on writing his Shakespearean books instead of keenly governing the country last year. This one side of Boris Johnson we rarely see in the political media because, let's face it, it has no use to him to advance his career. The man, when he wants to be, has some degree of intellectual capacity. Look, that might be over-exaggerating it, but I do have a clip that might showcase this.
Thank you very much. That's Sappho, and as you expect, she was called the 10th muse by the ancients. The Greeks were the first to expose their vulnerable egos, and like all egotists, they were extraordinarily competitive, not just in war, but in poetry and philosophy and sport and just about everything. One of the questions is, why did it all happen then? What was the reason for this flashpoint? And perhaps it was something to do with the topography of ancient Greece, the shadowy mountains and the echoey sea, as Achilles says, 25,000 miles of promontories and inlets that make Greece the country with the highest proportion of coastline to surface area in the world. So there were no big kingdoms with big rulers and loads of downtrodden peasants, but rather hundreds of little city-states arranged, as Plato said, like frogs around the pond, puffing out their cheeks in mutual emulation.
The comments section of this video really articulates a side of Boris Johnson we never see. If only Boris could have applied this much of passion and commitment to public service, what could have been? It does make me question, was Boris wrong in all this? I mean, let's look at it. What real skills does it take to become a Prime Minister in the UK? If we look at the cases of Tony Blair and David Cameron, who are more associated to the likes of being a snake oil salesman rather than public leaders, Boris Johnson, I think, chose the right path to eventually achieve his goal of becoming world king. Do we fault political parties or the public for nominating charming but deceptive personalities to the parliament? Or do we fault the media, who need headlines to thrive, and controversial leaders such as Trump and Boris Johnson provide just that, and they provide it all the time? Overall, if I had to summarize Boris Johnson, he's a very deliberate, eccentric man who has no control over his indulgences and feels entitled enough to roll over people because he was born into an environment where he's constantly reminded that there's only one rule for us and one rule for the rest of the population. Look, it does make me wonder, in a different world, if only he chose to be an Oxford, classics professor instead of becoming a politician or / celebrity. Maybe he could have, had healthy relationships and a balanced family life where he could have had clarity over how many children he's fathering. It does make me question, who do we have here to blame? Was he born with ruthless intentions, or was he molded by the elitist culture he was indoctrinated into? Comment below if you want to, and let me know why you hate Boris Johnson. Let's make it a diverse comment section, the way Tories like it.